we'll discuss reference angles and reference triangles. And we'll start by discussing what a reference angle is. A reference angle is an acute angle that's formed by the terminal side of theta and the x-axis. So if we have any arbitrary angle, the terminal angle will be what's formed with the x-axis. And in fact, if I draw then a line up to the x-axis, I have a triangle, and this is known as my reference triangle. We can then use coordinates to determine two sides, the opposite and the adjacent, and then our hypotenuse will always be positive. However, our opposite and adjacent sides no longer will be, depending on if I'm moving left, right, or up and down. We'll now look at finding some reference angles. The first one we have is 120, which comes just after 90 degrees. So my reference angle would be this one here. It's going to be how much further I need to get to 180. So my reference angle here would be 60 degrees. Next, we'll look at negative 60 degrees. So this one goes clockwise 60 degrees. And we can see that my reference angle is actually going to just be 60 degrees here, since that's what will get me back up to the x-axis. For 5 pi over 4, 180 degrees would be pi, which is 4 pi over 4. So this is 5 pi over 4. And if I go up with the x-axis, I get that my reference angle here is just pi over 4. Negative 7 pi over 6. Like I said, a straight angle is pi degree or pi radians. So we need to go an extra pi over 6, moving clockwise. So we have this here. So my reference angle would be this small one here, which actually turns out to be pi over 6. We can then find exact values for different things using these reference angles and the fact that a reference angle and a regular angle will have the same trig functions. For example, cosine of 135, here's 135. The reference angle here would be 45. So this is the same thing as cosine of 45 degrees, which we know is root 2 over 2. Next, we'll look at sine of 600 degrees. We know we can go around once to get 360. If we go around an additional 180, that puts us at 540, and then I need 60 more. So here's my triangle, and this angle here would be 60 degrees. Therefore, this is the same thing as sine of 60 degrees, which we know is root 3 over 2. Next, 17 pi over 6. Maybe the easiest way to think of this angle would be that we are pi over 6, or we are 1/6 away from being 3 pi. So here is pi, 2 pi, 3 pi would be all the way back, but we are just 30 degrees or pi over 6 degrees short of that. So this is the same thing as sine of pi over 6, which we know to be 1/2. The next thing we'll look at is the different signs of trig functions. If we have an angle in our quadrant 1, then we know that they are all going to be positive. These are the ones we originally started with, and all of these trig functions were positive. On the left-hand side, we know that x is going to now be negative and y will be positive, which tells us that sine will be positive and cosine here will be negative. In the third quadrant, we actually have, since both x and y will be negative, we have that both sine and cosine will be negative. In my fourth quadrant, y is negative, which tells me that sine is going to be negative. But x is once again positive, so cosine will be positive. So now we can know when things are positive and when things are negative to help us determine what we're dealing with. Let's consider an angle where tangent of theta is -3, and we know that sine of theta is positive. The fact that tangent is negative tells me I'm not in the first quadrant, but the fact that sine is positive tells me my y coordinate is positive. So we have an angle somewhere over here. And if I build the reference triangle here, we know that tangent is opposite over adjacent. And then we can use the Pythagorean theorem to get that the missing side is the square root of 10. Now I can find the rest of my trig functions. Sine will be opposite, or rather, fix that. Yeah, opposite over hypotenuse, which is going to be 3 square root of 10 over 10. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, which is square root of 10 over 10. We already have tangent. Cosecant is hypotenuse over opposite. Secant is hypotenuse over adjacent, which is just the square root of 10. And then finally, cotangent is adjacent over opposite. So we are able to find all 6 trig functions.